Leo Marshall sat at his usual corner table, his crisp navy suit showing faint signs of wear after a grueling day of meetings. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the snug atmosphere of Brewhaven Cafe, blending with the soothing strains of soft jazz playing in the background. Leo glanced at his watch for the third time in 10 minutes, the polished face catching the golden hues of the setting sun streaming through the tall windows. He let out a deep sigh, the weight of another year pressing on him. His 30th birthday, a milestone marked not by celebration, but by a hollow feeling of chasing goals that left him emptier with every achievement. The soft chime of the cafe door pulled Leo's attention momentarily, but it wasn't Marcus. Leaning back in his chair, he tried to temper his frustration. He had rearranged his tightly packed schedule to meet his childhood best friend, yet it seemed Marcus had forgotten the significance of today. "Excuse me, sir, would you like a refill?" The gentle voice caught him off guard. Looking up, he saw a young woman with auburn hair loosely braided over one shoulder. Her uniform was simple, but her warm smile lit up the otherwise mundane backdrop of his day. "Sure, thanks," Leo replied, pushing his cup toward her. She poured the coffee with practiced ease, her movements calm despite the lively buzz of the cafe. "Long day?" she asked lightly, her tone carrying a genuine note of interest. "You could say that," Leo answered, managing a polite smile. After a brief pause, he added, "Actually, it's my birthday. I was supposed to meet a friend, but I guess plans changed." Her hazel eyes brightened with surprise. "Happy birthday. Spending it here, though? That's unconventional." "It wasn't the plan," Leo admitted, nodding toward the empty chair across from him. "But I guess life has its own sense of humor," she chuckled softly. "Well, happy birthday again. I hope the day still manages to surprise you, in a good way." "Thanks, Leo hesitated, realizing he didn't know her name. "It's Isla Brooks." "Thanks, Isla," Leo replied, offering a small but sincere smile. As she walked away to tend to another table, he felt an unexpected sense of comfort from their brief exchange. Leo turned his gaze back to the window, watching the world outside move on without pause. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, a telltale sign of his growing impatience. His phone buzzed, drawing his attention. Picking it up with a mixture of hope and resignation, he saw Marcus's name flash on the screen. "Leo, I'm so sorry, man." Marcus's voice came through, hurried and muffled. "Something came up at the restaurant. One of my chefs didn't show, and I'm completely slammed tonight. Can we reschedule?" Leo's jaw tightened. "Yeah, sure, don't worry about it," he said, keeping his tone measured, though the sting of disappointment was unmistakable. "Thanks, buddy. I owe you one," Marcus replied, seemingly oblivious to the deeper impact of his words. Leo ended the call with a sigh, setting the phone down harder than he intended. Rubbing his temples, his thoughts swirled chaotically. 30 years old, a career most would envy, a luxurious apartment in the heart of the city, and a fiancée whose beauty turned heads wherever they went. Yet here he was, spending his birthday alone, the ache in his chest louder than the accolades around him. "Excuse me." Ila's voice interrupted again, softer this time. "I noticed you haven't touched your coffee. Everything okay?" Leo glanced up, surprised by her attention. "Yeah, just lost in thought, I guess." She tilted her head slightly, her curiosity evident. "Big thoughts for a big day?" "Something like that," he admitted, his lips curving into a half-smile. Before their conversation could continue, the cafe door swung open again, and a lively group of customers flooded in, filling the space with chatter. Isla gave Leo an apologetic smile before hurrying off to greet them. Leo sipped his coffee, the warmth spreading through him. He watched Isla navigate the cafe with a natural ease, her demeanor kind and unhurried, despite the growing demands around her. There was something magnetic about her, a refreshing authenticity that stood in stark contrast to the calculated, polished world he inhabited. His phone buzzed again, pulling him back to reality. This time, the notification was another reminder of the obligations and hollow connections that made up his carefully constructed life. It was a message from Vanessa. "Happy birthday, darling. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Love you." The words felt hollow. Vanessa had sent the same impersonal text for the past 3 years, always perfectly timed, but devoid of any true sentiment. Leo sighed, typing a brief response before setting the phone down on the table. His gaze drifted back to Ila, who was laughing with a customer. Her smile was genuine, her laughter reaching her eyes, and for a moment, Leo felt a pang of envy. How long had it been since he'd laughed like that, with no pretense or restraint? Before his thoughts could spiral further, Ela reappeared at his table, carrying a small plate in her hands. "On the house," she said with a smile, setting down a slice of chocolate cake. "What's this?" Leo asked, genuinely surprised. "Consider it a birthday gift," Ela replied with a casual shrug. Everyone deserves something sweet on their special day. For the first time that evening, Leo's smile felt real. "Thank you, Ela. That's really thoughtful of you." "It's just cake," she said with a playful wink, though her tone softened. "But I hope it helps, even just a little." As she walked away, Leo stared at the slice of cake, his chest tightening with an emotion he couldn't quite place. It wasn't about the cake, it was the gesture itself. Simple, kind, and entirely without expectation. It had been so long since anyone had done something for him without wanting something in return. The lively hum of Brewhaven softened as the evening grew later. Leo lingered at his table, long after finishing the cake, letting the warmth of the moment settle over him. When he finally stood to leave, he made his way to the counter to settle his bill. "Ela," he said, catching her attention. She turned, looking a bit surprised. "Yes? Thanks for the cake, the coffee, and just for being you, I guess." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but her smile returned, warm and bright. "You're welcome. Have a good night, Leo, and happy birthday again." Stepping out into the crisp night air, Leo felt a strange mix of emotions. The hollow ache he'd carried all day was still there, but it had been tempered by something else, something quieter and warmer. As he glanced back at the cafe, its lights spilling softly onto the sidewalk, he couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the day had surprised him after all. Tomorrow would bring another grind, another endless series of meetings, deadlines, and ladders to climb. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, he let himself savor the faint flicker of hope. Hope that somewhere in the simplicity of moments like these, he might find something real. Something lasting. The city buzzed around him as he walked toward his car. The streets alive with the energy of the night. The possibilities felt infinite yet strangely unanswered, as though the universe itself was asking him to consider what he truly wanted. By the time he reached his penthouse, the soft chime of the elevator doors echoed in the stillness, accentuating the emptiness of the space. The sleek, modern design of the apartment was cold and impersonal, despite the breathtaking view of Solace City's glittering skyline. Leo set his keys on the marble counter and poured himself a glass of scotch. The amber liquid shimmered in the dim light as he swirled it absently, his gaze fixed on the cityscape. A buzz from his phone pulled him out of his thoughts. Another message from Vanessa. "Hope you had a wonderful day, love. Don't forget about brunch with my parents on Sunday." Leo frowned, tension tightening in his chest. Her texts always felt more like reminders than actual conversation, checkpoints in a relationship that felt increasingly performative. With a deep sigh, he downed the scotch in a single gulp, the sharp burn grounding him momentarily. Setting the glass down harder than he intended, he loosened his tie and slumped onto the leather couch. His thoughts drifted back to Isla. Her warmth, her unguarded kindness, the way she'd noticed his mood and offered that simple slice of cake. It had touched him deeply. It was so different from Vanessa's polished but distant perfection. Isla's smile was effortless, her laughter unrestrained. For the first time in years, someone had made him feel truly seen. The shrill ring of his phone jarred him from his reverie. Startled, Leo fumbled for it, surprised to see the caller ID. "Dad," he answered, trying to mask the exhaustion in his voice. Leo Marshall answered, doing his best to mask the wariness in his voice. "Happy birthday, son," Gregory Marshall's voice came through, firm and authoritative as always. "I trust it was a productive day." Even on his birthday, productivity was the measure of success. Leo smirked bitterly. "It was fine, Dad. Thanks for calling." "Good," Gregory replied, not missing a beat. "Listen, we need to talk about Vanessa." Leo straightened in his seat, a familiar tension coiling in his shoulders. "What about her?" Gregory's tone was measured but carried the weight of expectation. "You've been engaged for nearly 2 years now. It's time to finalize things. Her family is influential, Leo. You know how valuable this connection could be for the business." Leo clenched his jaw, his frustration rising. I didn't realize my engagement was a corporate merger. Don't be dramatic, Gregory shot back, his sigh crackling over the line. You and Vanessa are a good match. She understands our world, our lifestyle. You need someone like her by your side. Leo's grip on the phone tightened, his father's words stoking a frustration that had been simmering for months. Dad, I'm not even sure she loves me for who I am, or if it's just about what I have. A long pause hung between them. Finally, Gregory replied, his tone dismissive. That's nonsense. Vanessa is devoted to you. Stop doubting everything and focus on what's important. The line went dead. Leo stared at the phone in his hand, his chest tightening with unresolved anger. He let it fall onto the couch beside him, the weight of his father's ambitions pressing down on him. Gregory's intentions had always been tied to the family's business empire. Everything was about the company. But Leo couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Vanessa's love was as transactional as his father's plans. The next morning, Leo arrived at the Marshall Enterprises headquarters downtown. The imposing facade of glass and steel reflected the bustling streets below, a testament to the 3 generations that had built the company into a real estate powerhouse. Inside, the air was as sharp and efficient as the building's exterior. Eva Langston, the company's no-nonsense CFO, was waiting in his office when he walked in. Her tablet was already in hand, and her crisp black suit mirrored her demeanor. Good morning, Leo, she said briskly. Happy belated birthday. I assume you've reviewed the Q3 projections I sent over last night? Leo nodded as he settled behind his sleek desk. Yes, Eva. They look solid, but there's something else I need to talk to you about. Her sharp gaze narrowed slightly as she took a seat across from him. What's on your mind? Leo hesitated, then took a breath. I need your help with a personal matter. Her brow arched in surprise. Personal? That's not like you. I know, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. But this is important. I need to know if someone in my life is genuine. Eva leaned back, folding her arms as understanding dawned on her. Vanessa? He nodded. I'm not sure she's with me for the right reasons, and I need to find out before I make any more commitments. For a moment, Eva's usually stoic expression softened, a flicker of concern breaking through. What do you want me to do? I want to stage a financial crisis, Leo said, the words feeling strange even as he spoke them. I want to see how she reacts if she thinks I've lost everything. Eva stared at him, her piercing eyes unreadable. After a long silence, she exhaled sharply. Leo, this is risky. My father doesn't need to know, Leo interjected quickly. This stays between us. She hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. All right, but if this backfires, it won't, he said firmly, though a sliver of doubt lingered in his mind. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and strategy sessions, but Leo's thoughts were elsewhere. He replayed conversations with Vanessa in his mind, analyzing her words and actions, searching for clues he might have missed. That evening, he met Vanessa for dinner at an exclusive restaurant she'd chosen. She arrived fashionably late, her designer dress hugging her figure perfectly. Happy belated birthday, darling, she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek before sliding gracefully into the seat across from him. Sorry I couldn't celebrate with you yesterday. I had a spa appointment I couldn't reschedule. Leo forced a smile, though the words grated on him. It's fine, thanks for making time tonight. As they ordered, Vanessa launched into a detailed account of her upcoming gala plans, her latest shopping spree, and the family's weekend retreat at their luxury villa in Sunhaven Bay. Leo listened, nodding in all the right places, his responses automatic. His mind, however, was preoccupied with the plan he and Eva had been setting in motion. When dessert arrived, Leo cleared his throat, his expression shifting. Vanessa, there's something I need to tell you. She glanced up from her phone, her perfectly shaped eyebrows arching slightly. What is it? I got some bad news today, he said, his voice carefully hesitant. The company's in trouble, serious trouble. We're on the brink of bankruptcy. Vanessa's fork hovered midair, her manicured fingers tightening around it. Bankruptcy? How? What happened? Leo hesitated, watching her closely. It's complicated, but the bottom line is, I might lose everything. For a moment, her expression froze, a flicker of panic flashing across her face before she quickly composed herself with a tight smile. Darling, don't worry, she said lightly. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do. Her words were reassuring, but the tension in her voice betrayed her unease. Leo's chest tightened as he waited for her to continue. Well, she said after a pause, her voice faltering slightly, maybe this is a good time to reassess things. Focus on what's realistic. What do you mean by realistic? Leo asked, his voice dropping slightly. Vanessa gave a nervous laugh. You know, it might be hard to maintain the lifestyle we're used to. Maybe we should take a step back, think about the future. Leo's stomach churned. Her words confirmed the doubts he'd been harboring for months. He carefully set his fork down, his gaze steady on hers. I see, he said quietly. Vanessa's smile remained, brittle and strained. Don't worry, darling. We'll figure it out. But Leo could see the cracks in her facade, the careful balance of charm and self-preservation beginning to crumble. For the first time, he truly saw how fragile their relationship was, how conditional. The early morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Marshall Enterprises, casting long streaks of light across the polished floors. Leo arrived earlier than usual, his thoughts clouded by the events of the previous night. Vanessa's strained smile and carefully measured words played on a loop in his mind. No matter how he dissected the interaction, he couldn't unsee the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of self-interest hidden behind her assurances. When he entered his office, Eva Langston was already seated, her sharp black suit immaculate as always. Her expression was unreadable, but the subtle arch of her brow signaled she was expecting an update. Rough night? She asked, cutting through the silence with her usual directness. Leo tossed his briefcase onto the desk and loosened his tie. You could say that. Eva leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Did she pass the test? Leo sighed heavily, sinking into his chair. Not exactly. She didn't outright leave, but she's already planting seeds about reassessing and being realistic. That's code for run while you can, isn't it? Eva's lips pressed into a thin line. It's not promising. No, it's not, Leo admitted, running a hand through his hair. We need to escalate, make it feel real. Eva tapped her tablet thoughtfully. We could craft a press release. Something about restructuring, potential layoffs, or major project failures, just enough to get the industry talking. Leo hesitated, a pang of unease gripping him. What about the employees, the team? I don't want to cause unnecessary panic. We can limit the scope internally, Eva replied. Keep it vague but impactful. The key is to make it convincing enough for her to believe. After a moment, Leo nodded, though the decision sat uneasily with him. Let's move forward, but keep it controlled. Eva stood, giving him a curt nod before leaving the office, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Alone again, Leo leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The doubt that had been gnawing at him for months was louder than ever. What he was doing felt risky, almost cruel, but he knew it was necessary. Better to face the truth now than live in denial. That afternoon, the announcement went live. A statement from Marshall Enterprises circulated online, citing unexpected market challenges and a decision to restructure key projects. The language was intentionally vague but ominous enough to create a stir among competitors and send ripples through the client base. Leo's phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. He ignored most of them, letting the chaos unfold while he waited for one name to appear. When it finally did, he hesitated, staring at Vanessa's name on the screen before swiping to answer. Leo, what's going on? Vanessa's voice was sharp, more demanding than concerned. I just saw the news. Why didn't you tell me this was coming? I didn't want to worry you, Leo said evenly, though his stomach churned at her tone. It's a lot to handle right now. A lot to handle? She repeated, her voice rising. Leo, this affects me too. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? People are asking me questions I don't have answers to. Leo's jaw tightened. Embarrassing? That's what you're worried about? The line went silent for a moment, and he could hear her breathing quicken. Of course I'm worried about you, she said, her tone brittle. But this isn't just about us. It's about my family's reputation. Vanessa, he interrupted, his voice cold, if this ruins your image, feel free to walk away. No one's forcing you to stay. Her silence was deafening. For a moment, Leo thought she might have hung up. Then finally she spoke, her voice low and unsteady. I think we need to talk, in person. Fine, he said shortly. Tonight, my place. The call ended, and Leo dropped the phone onto his desk. His chest tightened, his heart heavy. He'd expected this reaction, prepared for it, but it didn't make it hurt any less. That evening, the penthouse felt colder than usual. The sleek, modern decor that once reflected his ambition now felt stark and unwelcoming. Leo poured himself a drink, gripping the glass tightly as he waited. When the doorbell finally rang, he braced himself, setting the glass down before walking to the door. Vanessa stood on the other side, her expression carefully composed. She looked flawless as always, her elegance almost intimidating, but her eyes betrayed something else, a mix of frustration and hesitation. "Come in," Leo said, stepping aside. She entered, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "Leo, what's happening? This doesn't make sense. Your company has always been solid. How did this happen so suddenly?" He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her arms crossed tightly. "Things change, Vanessa. Markets shift. It's business." "Don't give me that," she snapped, her voice sharp. "You're hiding something. This doesn't feel real." Her accusation hit a nerve, and Leo's jaw tightened. "Are you implying I'm lying?" "I don't know what I'm implying," she said, her voice rising in frustration. I can't believe you didn't tell me. I've been your partner for years, Leo, or at least I thought I was." He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "And what would you have done differently, Vanessa? Stood by me? Or started planning your exit?" She flinched, her carefully crafted composure beginning to crack. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" he pressed. "Because it feels like the only thing you're worried about right now is how this affects you." Her silence was damning. Her gaze darted away as though searching for an escape. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I need time to think." Leo nodded, the heaviness in his chest growing. "Take all the time you need." She looked at him one last time before turning and walking toward the door. The soft click of it closing echoed through the penthouse, leaving Leo alone with his thoughts and the realization that their relationship, no matter how polished it seemed on the outside, was far more fragile than he'd allowed himself to admit. The truth was undeniable now. Vanessa's love had always been conditional. Deep down, he'd known it for a while, but seeing it so clearly left him feeling hollow. The buzz of his phone broke the heavy silence. This time, it wasn't Vanessa. "Hey." Isla's warm, steady voice came through the line. "I don't know if you're busy, but I was baking tonight and I made way too much. Thought you might want some?" Leo blinked, caught off guard by her unexpected call. "Isla, yeah, I'd love that." "Great," she said, her smile audible in her tone. "I'll swing by in a bit." For the first time that day, Leo felt the tension in his shoulders ease. Maybe tonight didn't have to end on such a sour note after all. The soft knock at his door broke the stillness of the night. Rising from the couch, Leo's footsteps echoed lightly against the cold marble floors as he made his way to the door. When he opened it, Isla stood there, a bright smile on her face and a simple tote bag slung over her shoulder. The warm, inviting aroma of freshly baked goods drifted in with her. "Hey," she said, holding up a neatly wrapped loaf of bread in a small container. "I figured banana bread and some homemade jam might cheer you up." Leo chuckled softly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It wasn't trouble," she replied, stepping inside when he gestured her in. "Honestly, I bake when I'm stressed, so consider yourself a lucky recipient." Her casual tone disarmed him, and for the first time that evening, he felt himself relax. "Rough day for you too, huh?" he asked. "You could say that," she admitted, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. She glanced around, taking in the sleek, modern design of the penthouse. "Wow, your place is intense. Not a single knick-knack or cozy corner in sight." "Guilty," Leo replied, leaning against the counter as he watched her unpack. "I guess I never got around to making it feel like home." She looked over her shoulder at him, her expression softening. "Maybe you've been too busy building homes for everyone else." Leo paused, her words striking closer to home than she realized. "Maybe." As Isla unwrapped the banana bread and began slicing it, Leo grabbed a couple of plates and set them on the counter. The simple domestic rhythm of the moment caught him off guard. It felt different. Comforting. "So," Isla began, her tone light but curious, "I saw the news about Marshall Enterprises. Restructuring, huh? Is it as bad as it sounds?" Leo stiffened slightly but forced his expression to remain neutral. It's complicated. The market's been tough. Ela nodded thoughtfully. I get that. It's been a tough year for a lot of people, but... She looked up at him, her eyes steady and sincere. If anyone can turn things around, it's you. Her quiet confidence in him made Leo pause. There was no trace of judgment or fear in her voice, just honest encouragement. I hope so, he said finally, his tone softer. They carried their plates to the living room and settled on the couch. Ila tucked her legs under herself, balancing her plate on her knee. So, she said with a playful grin, what do you do when you're not saving the real estate world? Leo smirked. You mean when I'm not buried in contracts and spreadsheets? Exactly, she teased. I used to play guitar, he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. Haven't touched it in years, though. Her eyes lit up. No way. You're one of those mysterious business types who secretly write songs about heartbreak? Something like that, he said with a laugh. What about you? He asked, leaning back. Besides baking and making everyone's day better? Her smile faltered slightly, and she glanced down at her plate. I'm trying to save up to open my own bakery. It's been my dream since I was a kid, but life keeps getting in the way. Leo studied her for a moment, noting the flicker of vulnerability in her expression. Life has a way of doing that, he said quietly. But you're the kind of person who makes things happen. I can see it. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and surprise. Thanks, Leo, that means a lot. They fell into a comfortable silence, the city lights casting a soft glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in a long while, Leo felt at ease, as though he could simply exist without the weight of the world pressing down on him. The screen lit up with Vanessa's name. Ila's eyes flicked to it briefly before she looked away, her expression unreadable. You can get that if you need to, she said softly, her tone carefully neutral. Leo hesitated, staring at the phone before silencing it. It can wait, he said simply. Ela raised an eyebrow but chose not to press the issue. Instead, she shifted the conversation, and they spent the next hour talking about everything from music to their favorite neighborhoods in Solace City. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in a long while, Leo felt truly present. When Isla finally stood to leave, Leo walked her to the door. She turned back to him before stepping out, her expression thoughtful. You know, she said, I think you're doing better than you give yourself credit for. Thanks, Isla, Leo replied, his voice genuine. And thanks for the bread. You might have ruined store-bought for me forever. She laughed, the sound light and musical. Glad to be of service. Good night, Leo? Good night, he said as the door closed behind her. For a moment, Leo leaned against the door, his mind racing. Isla was nothing like Vanessa. Her warmth, her kindness, her sincerity, it was both refreshing and terrifying at the same time. His phone buzzed again, and this time he picked it up. It was another message from Vanessa. We need to talk. Call me when you can. Leo stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He knew the conversation was inevitable, but he also knew it wouldn't change anything. Setting the phone down, he headed to bed, his thoughts lingering on Isla's laughter and the way she had made the world feel a little brighter. The next morning, Leo arrived at the office to find Eva waiting for him. Her expression was grim as she closed the door behind her. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Let me guess, Leo replied, sinking into his chair. The press release stirred up trouble. That's an understatement, Eva said, handing him her tablet. The board's already buzzing with questions, and some of our biggest clients are starting to panic. It's manageable for now, but it's clear the news isn't going unnoticed. Leo scanned the headlines, his stomach sinking. We expected this, he said. Sure, Eva agreed, but the question is, how far are you willing to go? If you keep this up, it won't just be Vanessa questioning your stability, it'll be the entire city. Leo set the tablet down, rubbing his temples. I'll handle it. For now, let's focus on damage control. Eva hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice lowering. Leo, I've known you a long time. Is this thing with Vanessa worth risking everything you've built? Her words hit harder than he expected. He met her gaze, the weight of the decision sinking in. If she can't handle this, then she's not the person I thought she was. And I need to know that. Before it's too late. Eva nodded slowly. All right, just be careful. This isn't a game. As Eva left, Leo leaned back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, but for the first time, he felt like he was getting closer to the truth. That evening, as Leo left the office, his phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from Ela. "Thanks again for last night. Hope today wasn't too crazy." Leo smiled, typing a quick response. "It was a rough day, but your banana bread helped more than you know." Slipping the phone into his pocket, he felt a small sense of calm. No matter what storms raged around him, Allah's presence was becoming a steady light. Leo didn't know where this journey would take him, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. Rain drizzled softly against the towering windows of his office, creating faint patterns on the glass. The hum of Solace City below was muffled, its usual chaos reduced to a distant murmur. He sat at his desk, his gaze fixed on the skyline, though his thoughts were elsewhere. His phone lay face down on the desk, Vanessa's unanswered messages lingering in the air like an unwelcome reminder. Despite the chaos caused by the staged financial crisis, Leo couldn't fully focus on work. His thoughts kept circling back to Isla, the way her laughter had filled the emptiness of his penthouse, the way her words had soothed his frayed nerves. For the first time in years, someone had seen him without an agenda, without expectations. Yet the weight of his crumbling facade loomed over him, a storm cloud threatening to consume him entirely. A soft knock on the door broke his reverie. Eva stepped inside, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. She closed the door behind her with purpose. "We've got a situation," she said. Leo leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What now?" "Victor Reed," Eva replied, her tone sharp. "Vanessa's father. He's been poking around, asking questions about the company's financials, and he's not being subtle." Leo's jaw tightened. "What's he looking for?" Eva shrugged, but her eyes narrowed. "Leverage, I'd guess, or confirmation that the rumors are true. Either way, it's not good." Leo leaned back, his mind racing. Victor Reed wasn't the type to dabble in idle curiosity. If he was investigating, it meant he was already calculating how to exploit the situation to his advantage. "Keep an eye on it," Leo said finally. "Let me know if he digs any deeper." Eva hesitated, then added, "And Vanessa?" Leo exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "She's not handling it well." Eva tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And Isla?" The unexpected question caught him off guard. "What about her?" he asked, his tone defensive. Eva allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "Nothing. Just, you seem lighter when you talk about her, that's all." Before Leo could respond, Eva turned and left, leaving her words hanging in the air. He sat in silence, the tension lingering in the room. The rest of the day blurred into an endless series of meetings and phone calls, each more draining than the last. By the time Leo left the office, the rain had intensified, turning the streets into shimmering rivers of light. Pulling his coat tighter around him, he stepped into the biting cold and considered heading straight home. Instead, he found himself driving toward the cafe. When he arrived, the warm glow of the cafe's interior was a stark contrast to the dreary night outside. Isla stood behind the counter, her auburn hair falling loosely around her face as she laughed with a customer. The sight of her instantly eased the tension in Leo's chest, and for the first time all day, he smiled. "Leo," she said, her eyes lighting up as she noticed him. "Back so soon, you're going to make people think you're addicted to coffee." "Maybe I'm just addicted to the company," he replied, his tone lighter than it had been all day. Isla chuckled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Well, in that case, I guess I'll allow it. What can I get you?" "Surprise me," Leo said, leaning against the counter. She grinned and set to work, her movements quick and efficient. A few minutes later, she handed him a steaming cup, her expression playful. "Hazelnut latte with a hint of caramel. Trust me, it'll make your night better." Leo took a sip, the rich flavors warming him instantly. "You aren't kidding. This is amazing." "Of course it is," she teased, her voice light. "I made it." They both laughed, the sound cutting through the gloom of the evening. For a moment, the weight of the day disappeared, replaced by the simple comfort of being around her. The rest of the cafe faded into the background, but as Leo glanced around, his eyes caught sight of a man sitting in the corner. His tailored suit and piercing gaze were unmistakable. Victor Rowe. Leo's stomach dropped as Victor's eyes met his, a faint smirk playing on the older man's lips. Victor stood and approached, his presence commanding the room despite the casual setting. Leo, Victor said smoothly, extending a hand. Fancy meeting you here. Victor, Leo replied, shaking his hand reluctantly. What brings you to this side of town? Oh, just grabbing a coffee, Victor said, his tone oozing false casualness. His eyes flicked briefly to Isla, who was watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. And who might this be? This is Isla, Leo said, his voice steady. A friend. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. A pleasure to meet you, Isla. Isla nodded politely, though her gaze darted toward Leo, sensing the tension between the two men. Nice to meet you too. Well, Victor continued, turning his attention back to Leo. I won't keep you, but we should talk soon. There are matters we need to discuss. Leo clenched his jaw, his posture stiffening. Of course. Victor's smirk widened slightly before he turned and walked out, his departure leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Isla looked at Leo, her brows furrowed with concern. Everything okay? She asked softly. Leo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated. She hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm lightly. Well, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here. Her simple gesture of kindness nearly unraveled him. For a fleeting moment, he considered telling her everything. The staged bankruptcy, his doubts about Vanessa, the weight of the lies he was carrying. But the words refused to come. Instead, he offered her a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Isla. That means a lot. The rest of the evening passed quietly, but Victor's presence lingered in Leo's mind long after he left the cafe. He knew the older man wouldn't back down, and whatever game he was playing was only just beginning. When Leo returned to his penthouse, he found another message from Vanessa waiting for him. I talked to my father. He's worried about you. We need to figure this out. Call me. Leo stared at the message, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and exhaustion. For the first time, he realized the world he had built so carefully was unraveling faster than he could control. Then another message came through, this one from Isla. Thanks for stopping by tonight. Hope you're okay. A faint smile tugged at Leo's lips. In the chaos of his life, Isla was quickly becoming the one thing that felt real, and for that, he was grateful. But as he set his phone down and looked out at the stormy skyline of Solace City, he knew the road ahead would only get harder. The battle with Victor, the truth about Vanessa, and his growing connection with Isla were all coming to a head. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was next. The tension in Leo's office was palpable the next morning when Eva walked in, her expression sharp and her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit, dropping into the chair across from his desk with an urgency that made Leo set aside the document he'd been pretending to review. We have a problem, she said, her voice low but intense. Leo leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. Let me guess. Victor. Eva nodded. He's been asking questions about the restructuring, but it's more than that. He's been reaching out to some of our clients. Subtly, of course, but it's clear what he's doing. He's trying to sow doubt about the company's stability. Leo's jaw tightened, his mind racing. And the board? They're nervous, Eva admitted. I can manage them for now, but... Her voice trailed off, the implications clear. Leo leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Victor isn't just looking for answers. He's positioning himself to strike. We need to stay ahead of him. Eva nodded, her expression resolute. I've already started monitoring his movements more closely, but we can't afford to let him get any traction with the board or our clients. Leo's mind churned with possibilities. The battle had only just begun, and every move from here on out would determine not only the future of his company, but everything he'd fought so hard to protect. But if Victor pushed harder, it could cost them critical support. And if Vanessa was involved, the unspoken possibility weighed heavily in the room. Leo clenched his fists. I'll deal with Victor. But what about damage control? Can we counter his narrative? Eva hesitated. We can try, but it'll take time. And right now, time isn't on our side. We need a decisive move to rebuild trust, both internally and externally. Leo exhaled sharply, rising from his chair to pace toward the window. The skyline of Solace City stretched before him, a mix of opportunity and looming threats. He had spent years building this company into something his grandfather would have admired. Now it all hung by a thread, thanks to a man who valued leverage over loyalty. I'll meet with him, Leo said finally, his tone steely. Face to face. If Victor wants to play games, let's see how far he's willing to go. Eva stood as well, her expression skeptical. And Vanessa? I'll handle her too, Leo replied, though the words felt heavier than he wanted to admit. Thanks, Eva. I'll keep you updated. She nodded and left, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors. The sound echoed in the silence, a stark reminder of the battles waiting for him on the other side of his office door. The meeting with Victor was scheduled for that evening at an upscale restaurant downtown. Leo arrived early, the controlled chaos of his day still buzzing in his mind. The restaurant's sleek, dimly lit decor was a perfect backdrop for high-stakes conversations and hidden agendas. Victor was already there, seated at a corner table, nursing a glass of red wine and scrolling through his phone like a man who owned the world. As Leo approached, Victor looked up, his shark-like grin calculated and unsettling. Leo, Victor said smoothly, standing to shake his hand, I wasn't sure you'd come. You made it impossible to refuse, Leo replied, his voice even. They sat down and a waiter appeared almost immediately, taking their orders with practiced efficiency before disappearing. Victor swirled his wine, his gaze fixed on Leo. Let's not waste time, Victor began. I've been hearing troubling things about Marshall Enterprises. As someone with shared interests, I thought it prudent to address them. Shared interests? Leo asked, arching an eyebrow. Is that what you call undermining my company behind my back? And Victor chuckled softly, his sharp gaze unwavering. Undermining? Hardly. I'm simply protecting my investments, and, by extension, Vanessa's future. Surely you can understand that. Leo leaned forward, his tone cold. What I understand is that you're meddling in things you don't fully grasp. The company is fine, Victor. Whatever rumors you've heard are exaggerated. Victor's smirk didn't waver. Perhaps, but perception is everything in business, isn't it? If people believe Marshall Enterprises is unstable, it doesn't matter what the truth is. The damage will already be done. And you're the one holding the match, Leo shot back, his voice low but firm. Victor's expression darkened, the charm slipping for a brief moment. Careful, Leo, you may think you're in control, but alliances are fragile. And Vanessa? She deserves security, stability. If you can't provide that, perhaps it's time to reevaluate your priorities. Leo's stomach churned, but he didn't let it show. Vanessa's security isn't your concern or your bargaining chip. This isn't a negotiation. Victor leaned back, his smile returning, colder than before. Everything is a negotiation, my boy. You do well to remember that. The waiter returned, interrupting the tension with plates of elegantly arranged food. Neither man touched their meal, the air between them thick with unspoken threats. The conversation shifted to safer topics, market trends, mutual acquaintances, but the underlying tension remained. As the dinner dragged on, Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it briefly, noting a message from Isla. Hope tonight's meeting isn't too crazy. Let me know if you need a distraction after. The faintest smile touched his lips, a rare moment of calm in an otherwise turbulent night. Victor noticed. Important call? He asked, his voice laced with curiosity. Nothing that concerns you, Leo replied, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Victor's grin widened slightly, his eyes calculating. But Leo didn't flinch. Tonight was just the opening move in a much larger game, and Leo wasn't about to let Victor see him falter. Later that night, Leo found himself driving toward Isla's neighborhood. He hadn't planned on seeing her, but after his tense meeting with Victor, he needed something real, a reminder of what truly mattered. The cafe was closed, its windows dark, but light spilled from a small storefront a few doors down. The faint aroma of sugar and vanilla drifted through the air, pulling him closer. He stepped inside to find Isla bustling around a makeshift kitchen. Her hair was tied back, and a light dusting of flour clung to her cheeks. She looked up, startled, but her face quickly broke into a wide smile. Leo, she said, setting down a tray of cookies. What are you doing here? I was in the neighborhood, he replied, his voice soft. Thought I'd check in. Well, you caught me in my natural habitat, she said with a laugh, gesturing to the trays of baked goods. I'm catering an event tomorrow, so I thought I'd get a head start. Leo leaned against the counter, watching her move effortlessly through the space. Do you ever take a break? Not really, she admitted, her tone light but honest. But it's worth it. This is what I love. Her simple, heartfelt words grounded him. Isla, he began, hesitating slightly. Do you ever feel like you're fighting a battle you can't win? She paused, looking at him with quiet understanding. All the time, she said softly. But you keep fighting anyway, because some things are worth it. Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time in weeks, Leo felt a flicker of clarity. He didn't know what the future held: Victor's threats, Vanessa's wavering loyalty, or the uncertainty surrounding his company's fate. But one thing was clear: Isla was worth fighting for. She handed him a cookie, teasing him about his lack of baking skills, and for a moment, the storm in his mind quieted. In that moment, Leo knew he wasn't ready to give up. Not on his company, not on the truth, and certainly not on the possibility of something real with Isla. But as the night wore on, the looming shadows of Victor's schemes and Vanessa's entanglements reminded him that his hardest battles were still ahead. The grand ballroom of the Solaris Club shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their brilliance casting intricate patterns across the polished marble floors. The gala was in full swing, with the city's elite mingling in tailored suits and glittering gowns. Soft classical music floated through the air, adding a touch of elegance to the evening. Leo stood near the edge of the room, nursing a glass of champagne and scanning the crowd with a practiced eye. His posture was calm, but his mind was on high alert. This wasn't just another social event, it was the Lion's Den. Victor Rowe was here, of course. His commanding presence was unmistakable as he worked the room with calculated ease. Victor exuded confidence, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, but Leo could see the sharp intent behind every smile. Victor wasn't here to socialize, he was here to dominate. Leo, a familiar voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Vanessa approaching, her silver gown catching the light with every step. She looked stunning as always, but to Leo she seemed as polished and hollow as the champagne flute in his hand. "Vanessa," he said neutrally, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, her smile tight. "You've been avoiding my calls." "I've been busy," Leo said evenly, taking a sip of his champagne. She frowned, stepping closer and lowering her voice. "This isn't the time to play games. My father is worried about your company, and frankly, so am I. People are talking, Leo. They're saying Marshall Enterprises is on the verge of collapse." Leo's grip on the glass tightened, but his expression remained calm. "And what exactly are they saying?" Vanessa pressed, her voice sharp. "That you've lost control? That the board is panicking? That this restructuring is just a symptom of deeper issues?" Leo's gaze didn't waver. "Do you believe them?" Vanessa hesitated, her eyes darting away for the briefest moment before meeting his again. "I want to believe you, Leo, but you're not giving me much to work with. If there's something you're not telling me—" "This isn't just about me, is it?" Leo interrupted, his voice low but firm. "It's about how this affects you, your father, your family's reputation." "That's not fair," Vanessa snapped, her eyes narrowing. "I've stood by you." "Have you?" Leo asked, his tone cutting. "Because it feels like you're more worried about what this means for you than what I'm going through." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Victor's voice cut through the room. "Leo!" Victor called jovially, approaching with practiced ease. Leo forced a smile as Victor clasped his shoulder, his grip just a shade too firm. "Victor," Leo replied smoothly. "Always a pleasure." "Vanessa, darling," Victor interjected, his tone smooth as silk. "Why don't you check on the auction items for me?" Vanessa hesitated, glancing between the two men, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded and walked away, leaving Leo and Victor alone. As soon as she was out of earshot, Victor's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. "You're walking a fine line, Leo," Victor said quietly. "This little act of yours, it's only going to hurt you in the long run." "What act?" Leo asked, his tone equally quiet but laced with defiance. Victor smirked. "The restructuring, the sudden silence from your board. Do you think people aren't paying attention? If you're trying to bluff your way out of trouble, it's not working." "Maybe you're the one who's bluffing," Leo replied coolly. "Stirring up rumors, planting seeds of doubt. It's desperate, Victor, and transparent." Victor's eyes narrowed, his composure slipping for just a moment. "Careful, Leo. You may think you're untouchable, but the higher you climb, the harder the fall." "I'll keep that in mind," Leo said, his tone unwavering. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have people to see." Victor stepped back, his smirk returning as he watched Leo walk away. The tension in the air was palpable, but Leo didn't let it show. He'd expected Victor to be confrontational tonight, and he wasn't about to let the man rattle him. As Leo moved through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings and deflecting probing questions, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a message from Eva. Found something. Need to meet. Urgent. Leo's pulse quickened. Eva wasn't one to exaggerate. He quickly sent a reply. Where? Her response came almost instantly. West Lounge. Now. The corridor leading to the West Lounge was quiet, the hum of the gala fading behind him. Leo pushed open the heavy oak door to find Eva standing near a window, her tablet in hand, her expression grim. What is it? Leo asked, closing the door behind him. Eva turned to face him, her tone serious. I've been digging into Victor's recent moves, and I found something. He's not just spreading rumors, he's positioning himself to poach our biggest clients. Leo's chest tightened. How? By leveraging your so-called collapse, Eva explained, holding out her tablet. He's offering lower rates, faster turnarounds, and throwing in incentives to sweeten the deal. He's painting himself as the safer bet while making you look like a liability. Leo stared at the screen, the data driving home the severity of the situation. Victor wasn't just meddling, he was actively sabotaging Marshall Enterprises. With Vanessa's loyalty already hanging by a thread, the implications were devastating. Does the board know? Leo asked, his voice low and tense. Not yet, Eva said, shaking her head. But if this goes public, it could destroy everything. Leo stared at Eva, her words echoing in his mind. Does Vanessa know about this? He asked, his tone tight. Eva hesitated. I don't think she's aware of the full extent of what Victor is doing, but if she does... Her voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. If Vanessa was complicit, it wouldn't just mean the end of their relationship. It would shatter what little trust Leo had left in her. I'll handle it, he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Keep this between us for now. I'll confront Victor directly. Eva nodded, though her expression remained tense. Be careful, Leo. This isn't just business anymore. It's personal. When Leo returned to the gala, the weight of Eva's revelations pressed heavily on him. Every decision from this point forward would shape not only the fate of Marshall Enterprises, but also his future. Scanning the room, his gaze landed on Vanessa near the auction tables, her laughter ringing out as she charmed a group of donors. To everyone else, she appeared radiant and poised, but to Leo it was just another layer of distance between them. Vanessa, he said, cutting through the conversation. His voice was calm but firm, stopping her mid-sentence. She turned, her smile faltering slightly. Leo, is everything okay? Can we talk? He asked. Her eyes flicked to the group of donors, then back to him. Of course. Leo led her to a quieter corner of the room, his mind racing as he searched for the right words. When he finally spoke, his tone was serious. Vanessa, how much do you know about what your father's been doing? Her brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, he said sharply, lowering his voice. He's sabotaging my company, undercutting my clients, spreading lies about me, and I need to know if you're involved. Her eyes widened in shock. Leo, I had no idea, I swear. He studied her carefully, looking for any sign of deception. If she was lying, she was doing an impeccable job of hiding it. I want to believe you, he said finally, his voice softer but still guarded. But if you're keeping anything from me, anything, I need to know now. I'm not, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. Leo, I had no idea. I'll talk to him. I'll fix this. But as she spoke, Leo couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. No matter how sincere she seemed, trust once fractured was difficult to rebuild. The rain returned later that night, its steady rhythm tapping against the expansive windows of Leo's penthouse. The city lights outside cast a soft glow across the room, but inside, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Leo sat at his desk, his head in his hands, replaying Eva's revelations over and over in his mind. Every piece of evidence pointed to Victor's deliberate sabotage, and while Vanessa's reaction had seemed genuine, doubt lingered. Could she really have been unaware? His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. For a moment, he hesitated. Isla had become a rare source of peace amidst the chaos, but tonight he wasn't sure he had the energy to put on a brave face. Still, something compelled him to answer. "Hey," he said softly, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Hi," Isla replied, her tone tentative. I was thinking about you. You seemed a little off the last time we talked." Leo leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Yeah, it's been a lot. Do you want to talk about it?" she offered gently. "Or I can just listen. Sometimes it helps." Her sincerity cut through his defenses, and before he knew it, the words were spilling out. Not everything. He couldn't tell her about the staged financial crisis or Victor's sabotage, but enough for her to understand the weight he was carrying. "It feels like everything I've built is slipping through my fingers," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "No matter how hard I try, someone's always there to tear it down." There was a pause on the other end, and then Isla spoke, her tone steady and reassuring. "Leo, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. If anyone can handle this, it's you." Her confidence in him felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." "Well," she said with a small laugh, "if you ever need a reminder, you know where to find me." He smiled faintly, the tightness in his chest easing just a little. "I'll keep that in mind." They said their goodnights, and as Leo hung up, he felt a flicker of clarity amidst the chaos. As Leo sat at his desk, his phone call with Isla replayed in his mind, her words still echoing like a lifeline in the storm. "You're one of the most determined people I've ever met. If anyone can handle this, it's you." Those simple, sincere words had offered him a clarity he hadn't felt in days, reminding him not only of what he was fighting for but why he couldn't afford to lose. Not just his company, but something genuine, something real. The next morning, Leo arrived at the offices of Alder Corporation with a sharpened focus. Eva was already waiting in his office, her usual no-nonsense demeanor matched by the resolve in her posture. She handed him her tablet without preamble. "Anything new?" Leo asked, settling into his chair. "Victor's ramping things up," she said grimly. "He's already poached 2 of our smaller clients, and he's circling a few of the bigger ones. If he lands them, it could tip the scales." Leo's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the data. The list of clients at risk felt like a punch to the gut. Victor was moving aggressively, and the cracks in Alder's foundation were becoming harder to patch. "What about the board?" he asked. "They're nervous," Eva admitted, "but they're still with us for now. We need to move fast to keep it that way." Leo nodded, his mind racing. "We need leverage," he said finally, "something to counter Victor's narrative." Eva hesitated before speaking. "There's one more thing," she began cautiously. "I had someone dig into Victor's financials. His company isn't as solid as he's making it seem." Leo's eyes narrowed. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Eva said, handing him a report. "If we can verify this, it could turn the tide, but it's risky." Leaning back, Leo weighed the options. Exposing Victor's weaknesses could either be the masterstroke they needed or a gamble that backfired spectacularly. But with the walls closing in, he knew it was a chance he had to take. "Let's do it quietly," he said. "I don't want this blowing up in our faces." Eva nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll get started." As Eva left, Leo's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen. "Vanessa, we need to talk. Please." He stared at the message, conflicted. Another confrontation was the last thing he wanted, but ignoring her would only make things worse. After a deep breath, he typed a reply. "Meet me at the office. Noon." Vanessa arrived on time, her face anxious as she stepped into Leo's office. Her polished exterior seemed to have slipped, replaced with a vulnerability Leo hadn't seen before. For a moment, he wondered if her concern was genuine. "Leo," she began, sitting across from him, "I talked to my father." Leo's tone remained calm but guarded. "And?" "He admitted to reaching out to your clients," she said, her voice trembling. "He said it was just business, but I know it's more than that. I didn't know, Leo, I swear." Her eyes searched his, and for the first time in weeks, Leo saw a flicker of honesty. He wanted to believe her. "I believe you," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change what he's done." Vanessa shook her head, her expression desperate. "I'll talk to him again. I'll make him stop." Leo exhaled sharply. "This isn't just about stopping him, Vanessa. It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you or anyone in your family." Her face crumbled, and for a moment, Leo felt a pang of guilt, but he couldn't let his guard down now, not when everything was on the line. Leo, please, she said, her voice breaking. I love you. I want to fix this. He studied her carefully, torn between his emotions and the logic screaming at him to stay cautious. If you really mean that, you'll prove it, he said finally. Not with words, with actions. Vanessa nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I will, I promise. As she left, Leo felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. He wanted to believe her, but his instincts told him to tread carefully. Later that afternoon, Eva returned, a file in her hands and a glint of triumph in her eyes. We've confirmed it, she said, handing him the folder. Victor's company is hemorrhaging money. Leo flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he scanned the damning evidence. Victor had been using smoke and mirrors to project an image of stability, but the reality was far grimmer. This is it, Leo said, his tone decisive. We can use this to turn the tables, but we need to handle it carefully. Eva nodded, her expression serious. If this gets out too soon, it could hurt us as much as him. Leo nodded. Let's move quickly but quietly. We're not losing this fight. As Eva left to begin executing their strategy, Leo felt a renewed sense of determination. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time he could see a path forward. That evening, Leo found himself walking into Isla's cafe again, drawn to the warmth and simplicity of her world. As the bell above the door jingled, she looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile. You're becoming a regular, she teased, handing him his usual order before he even had to ask. Maybe I just like the company, he replied, his tone lighter than it had been all day. As they talked, Leo felt the stress of the day begin to fade. Isla's laughter had a way of making the chaos in his mind feel manageable, her presence a balm for his frayed nerves. For a brief moment he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could turn out okay. But deep down, he knew the storm was far from over. Victor's schemes and Vanessa's wavering promises still loomed, waiting to test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The relentless ringing of Leo's phone jolted him awake. Groggily, he fumbled for the device on his nightstand, blinking at the name on the screen. Isla. It was nearly 2 a.m. Isla, he answered, his voice thick with sleep, but the tension in her voice snapped him to attention. Leo, I'm so sorry to call this late, she said, panic lacing every word. It's Mia. She's burning up, and I don't know what to do. I've tried everything, but her fever won't go down. Mia, Ila's younger sister. Leo remembered her mentioning the girl's health struggles before, though she had never gone into much detail. Where are you? He asked, already swinging his legs out of bed and grabbing his keys. At home, Ila replied, her voice trembling. I didn't know who else to call. Stay with her. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Leo said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He hung up before she could respond, throwing on a jacket and grabbing his wallet. The cold night air bit at his skin as he stepped into the elevator, his mind racing. He didn't know much about Mia, but the fear in Ila's voice told him everything he needed to know. The streets were eerily quiet, the city's usual hum muted under the glow of the streetlights. When Leo pulled up outside Ila's modest apartment, she was already at the door. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and her eyes filled with worry. Leo, she breathed, relief washing over her as he stepped inside. Thank you for coming. Her apartment was small but filled with warmth, framed photos on the mantel, a colorful quilt draped over the couch. But tonight, the space was heavy with concern. On the couch lay Mia, her cheeks flushed with fever. She stirred weakly as Leo approached, her small frame barely moving under the weight of the blanket. Have you called her doctor? Leo asked, his voice calm but urgent. I tried, but it's so late, Isla said, her hands trembling. And I can't afford an ER visit right now. Don't worry about that, Leo interrupted firmly. She needs care, and we're going to get it. Come on. He didn't wait for Ila to argue, gently scooping Mia into his arms. The girl barely stirred, her head resting limply against his shoulder. Ila followed closely, her eyes a mix of gratitude and fear. The drive to the hospital was tense. The silence in the car was broken only by the sound of Mia's shallow breathing. Ila sat in the back seat, gently stroking her sister's hair, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Leo focused on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as the hospital's emergency entrance came into view. Hours passed in a blur of waiting rooms and worried glances. The sterile hum of the hospital was a stark contrast to the warmth of Isla's apartment. Leo watched as Isla hovered over Mia, her concern unwavering despite her exhaustion. When the doctor finally came out with an update, Isla clutched Leo's arm tightly. "She's stable," the doctor said. "It looks like a viral infection, but we'll need to monitor her overnight just to be safe." Isla exhaled shakily, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. As they settled into the quiet hours of the night, Isla turned to Leo. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Leo looked at her, his expression soft. "You don't have to do it alone, Isla. I'm here." And in that moment, as the chaos of the night began to settle, Leo realized just how deeply he cared for her, and how far he was willing to go to protect the people who mattered most. She looked back at him, her expression a blend of gratitude and raw vulnerability. Before she could reply, a doctor approached, a clipboard in hand, his expression calm and professional. "Are you family?" the doctor asked, glancing between the two of them. "She's my sister," Isla said quickly, stepping forward. "Is she okay?" The doctor offered a small, reassuring smile. "She's stable now. The fever was caused by an infection, but we've started her on antibiotics, and she's responding well. She'll need plenty of rest, but she should be fine." Isla let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging as relief washed over her. Thank you so much." The doctor gave a small nod before walking away, leaving Isla and Leo alone. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking. "She's okay," she whispered, her words catching in her throat. "She's really okay." Leo smiled softly and pulled her into a comforting hug. Isla clung to him tightly, her tears soaking into his shirt as she let out the pent-up fear of the night. For a moment, everything else, the chaos, the stress, faded away, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. By the time they returned to Ila's apartment, the first soft rays of dawn were creeping over the city skyline. Maggie was asleep in her room, her fever broken, but her energy still sapped from the ordeal. Isla sat on the couch, cradling a steaming mug of tea, while Leo handed her a blanket. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, though her tone was full of gratitude. "I wanted to," Leo replied, sitting down beside her. "Besides, I wouldn't have slept anyway." A faint smile crossed her lips, exhaustion evident in her features. "You were amazing tonight. I don't know how I'll ever thank you." "You don't have to," he said simply, his tone full of quiet sincerity. "I meant what I said earlier. You're not alone, Isla. Not anymore." Her eyes searched his, and for a brief moment, the outside world seemed to disappear. There was something unspoken in the air, a connection deeper than words, and Leo could feel it in every fiber of his being. But before either of them could act on the moment, a faint rustling came from Maggie's room. Isla broke eye contact and stood quickly, her maternal instincts kicking in. "I should check on her," she said. Leo nodded, watching her disappear down the hall. His chest tightened with a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. In Isla, he saw something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: genuine kindness, unshakable resilience, and a sense of purpose that went far beyond wealth or ambition. When Isla returned a few moments later, her movements were slower, the night's toll finally catching up with her. She sat back down, looking more at ease. "She's asleep," she said, her voice soft. "I think she'll be okay now." "That's good," Leo said, his voice equally quiet. "You should get some rest too." She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm too wired to sleep, but you've done more than enough. I don't want to keep you." Leo hesitated, torn between leaving and staying. Finally, he stood, his movements reluctant. "If you need anything at all, just call me." "I will," she promised, walking him to the door. As Leo stepped outside into the crisp morning air, he felt a strange clarity settle over him. The storm clouds of Victor's schemes and Vanessa's wavering loyalty still loomed, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. And in Isla's warmth and sincerity, he had found a glimmer of hope to carry him forward. As Leo drove through the quiet streets, Isla's words echoed in his mind. "You're not alone." For the first time, he let himself believe them. The weight of the world on his shoulders felt just a little lighter, the promise of support giving him strength for the battles ahead. The boardroom of Ridgeway Properties was unusually quiet as Leo entered, his polished shoes clicking against the sleek wooden floors. The usual murmur of conversation among board members fell silent, their wary eyes tracking him as he moved to the head of the long oak table. Eva stood nearby, her posture straight, her expression tense but composed, a stack of crisp folders in her hands. Leo understood their unease. The rumors of Ridgway's supposed instability, carefully planted and fanned by Victor Kane's calculated efforts, had spread like wildfire. Whispers of doubt had begun creeping into the ranks, threatening to undermine his leadership. Today, he needed to extinguish those doubts for good. Standing tall at the head of the table, Leo swept his gaze across the room. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but commanding. "I know there's been a lot of speculation recently. Today I want to address it head-on." Eva stepped forward, distributing the folders with a practiced efficiency. "Inside you'll find updated financials and next quarter projections," she explained. "They confirm what we already know. Ridgway Properties remains solid. The restructuring has strengthened our foundation, not weakened it." The board members flipped through the documents, murmurs rippling across the room. Leo gave them a moment, watching as their initial skepticism began to fade. "What we're facing," Leo continued, "isn't a financial problem. It's a problem of perception, and that perception has been deliberately manipulated." His words lingered in the air like a thunderclap. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, their faces reflecting both concern and curiosity. "Victor Kane has been targeting our clients," Leo said, his tone sharp. "He's spreading false information about our stability to position his company as the better option. But here's what he doesn't want anyone to know. His company is in far worse shape than ours." Eva stepped forward again, her tablet synced to the large screen at the front of the room. A presentation flickered to life, displaying damning figures and charts. "We've conducted a thorough investigation into Kane Enterprises' financials," she explained, her voice crisp. "Their cash flow is dangerously strained. They've been relying on short-term loans to stay afloat. If even one major deal falls through, they're on the brink of collapse." The board members leaned in, their interest piqued. Margaret's data was compelling, an undeniable glimpse into Victor's precarious situation. Leo seized the moment. "This isn't strategy, it's desperation," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "Victor Kane is using smoke and mirrors to distract from his vulnerabilities, but we will not let him undermine us any further." The murmurs around the table grew louder, a clear shift in energy. Leo could feel the tide turning. The confidence he so desperately needed was building, but he knew the fight wasn't over. "I'm scheduling personal meetings with our top clients," Leo continued, his voice resolute. "We'll reassure them of our stability and our vision for the future. But I need your support. If we stand united, we won't just weather this storm, we'll emerge stronger." For a moment, silence settled over the room. Then, Alan Pierce, one of the senior board members, broke it. "Let's move forward," he said firmly. "We trust you, Leo." One by one, the other board members nodded, their confidence visibly returning. Eva met Leo's gaze and gave a subtle nod, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Leo felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For now, he had their trust. But the real battle, the one beyond the walls of this boardroom, was only just beginning. Later that evening, Leo sat alone in his office, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. He stared at his phone as it buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a message from Vanessa. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." His chest tightened as he read the words. He hadn't seen Vanessa since their tense exchange at the gala, but he knew this confrontation was inevitable. With a resigned sigh, he typed his reply. "My place. 8 p.m. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, as poised and immaculate as always. But something was different. Her usual air of unshakable confidence had been replaced by hesitance. Her emerald green dress shimmered softly under the dim lighting, but her face betrayed unease. "Leo?" she said quietly as she stepped inside. "Thank you for seeing me." He nodded, gesturing for her to sit on the couch. She hesitated briefly before taking a seat, smoothing her dress nervously. "What's this about, Vanessa?" Leo asked, keeping his tone even. She looked down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I talked to my father," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He admitted to contacting your clients. He swears it's just business, but—" Her voice faltered. "I didn't know, Leo. I didn't know he'd go this far." Leo studied her closely, searching for any signs of deceit. Her words seemed genuine, but trust was a fragile thing, especially now. I want to believe you, he said finally, his voice soft but firm. But this isn't just about your father, Vanessa. It's about us. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. Her face crumbled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'll fix this, she said desperately. I'll prove to you that I'm on your side, I promise. Leo leaned back, his heart heavy with doubt. He wanted to believe her, needed to, but his instincts warned him to stay cautious. Your father's actions nearly destroyed everything I've worked for, and you stood by and let it happen. I didn't know, she insisted, tears spilling freely now. Leo, you have to believe me. I didn't know how far he'd gone, if I had. But you knew enough, Leo interrupted, his tone colder now. You knew he was meddling, and you chose to look the other way. That's just as bad. Her shoulders shook as sobs racked her body. She didn't even try to wipe the tears away. I love you, Leo, she whispered. I've always loved you. Can't we fix this? Leo looked at her, his heart torn between anger, sorrow, and a lingering flicker of what once was. He wanted to believe her, to forgive her. But the trust between them had been shattered, and he wasn't sure it could ever be rebuilt. I don't think we can, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa let out a shaky sob, her body trembling as she tried to hold herself together. For a fleeting moment, Leo almost reached out to comfort her, but he stopped himself. This was the end of something that should have ended long ago. Goodbye, Vanessa, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. She stood slowly, the tears glistening under the dim light. Goodbye, Leo, she said, her voice breaking. Then she turned and walked out the door, leaving behind a silence that felt deafening in its finality. The next morning, Leo met with Eva to finalize their strategy against Victor. Meetings with top clients were set, and the evidence of Kane Holdings' instability was ready to be presented. But even as he buried himself in the fight, his thoughts kept drifting to Ela. That evening, the warmth of the cafe drew Leo in again, like a lighthouse in a storm. Ela greeted him with her usual radiant smile, her presence instantly grounding him. Rough day? She asked, sliding his usual drink across the counter. You could say that, Leo replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. But it's getting better. They talked for hours, their conversation effortless and free of pretense. As Ela laughed, her eyes sparkling in the soft cafe light, Leo realized something he hadn't dared admit before. Ela wasn't just a source of comfort. She was a reminder of everything he had been missing. Kindness, sincerity, and a sense of home. For the first time in weeks, Leo felt a glimmer of hope that the battles he was fighting might lead to something worth holding on to. But as the evening wore on, the looming shadow of Victor's schemes and the weight of the choices ahead kept gnawing at him. The fight wasn't over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The grand hall of the prestigious Landmark Hotel shimmered with opulence. Glittering chandeliers hung high above polished marble floors, their light refracting in dazzling patterns. The air buzzed with hushed conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was the annual real estate gala, a cornerstone event where the city's most powerful players gathered to flaunt their success, forge alliances, and measure their standing against their competitors. Leo stood near the entrance, his tailored navy suit impeccable. His posture exuded calm confidence, but beneath the polished surface, his mind churned with calculated intensity. Tonight wasn't just a social obligation. It was another battlefront in his war with Victor Kane. Scanning the crowd, Leo's sharp eyes caught sight of Victor across the room. The older man was in his element, charming a group of wealthy investors with his smooth demeanor and easy laugh. But Leo knew the truth behind that polished facade, and tonight he intended to exploit it. Taking a deep breath, Leo stepped into the lion's den. The night was far from over. Leo wasn't calm, not tonight. This wasn't a night for mingling or exchanging pleasantries. It was a battleground. Tonight, he would confront Victor Kane publicly and dismantle the narrative that Victor had spent months weaving. Eva approached him, her expression razor-sharp, a sleek black folder clutched tightly in her hands. Everything's set, she said, handing the folder to Leo. The AV team confirmed the presentation. It'll be ready when you give the signal. Leo nodded, his grip firm on the folder. Good. And the board? They're on edge, Eva admitted, her tone low. Victor's been working the room all night. If we don't handle this perfectly, we could lose them. "We won't," Leo replied, his voice steady despite the storm of anticipation roiling within him. As the evening progressed, Leo watched Victor prowl the room like a practiced predator, his charm disarmed, his laughter seemed genuine. But Leo saw through the facade. Victor wasn't here to celebrate, he was here to land the final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced from the stage, cutting through the hum of the crowd, "please join us for tonight's keynote presentation, delivered by none other than Leo Hart, CEO of Heartstone Realty." Polite applause followed, restrained but watchful. Adjusting his tie, Leo inhaled deeply, his heart pounding as he made his way to the stage. He cast a quick glance toward Victor, who stood near the back of the room, his expression a stoic mask. "Thank you," Leo began, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "It's an honor to stand here tonight, among so many respected colleagues and competitors. This industry has always been about more than just buildings and numbers. It's about trust, vision, and resilience." The room quieted, the audience leaning in with curiosity. Leo let the silence settle, giving his next words weight. "Recently, my company has faced challenges. Challenges that some have exploited to question our stability and integrity. Tonight, I want to set the record straight." With a gesture toward the screen behind him, a slide appeared, displaying detailed financial charts. "These are Heartstone Realty's financials for this quarter. As you can see, we remain strong, with a clear plan for growth and stability. The restructuring we implemented was not a sign of weakness, but a strategic move to adapt to evolving market conditions." The murmurs in the room shifted. Skepticism gave way to curiosity as the audience pored over the numbers. Leo's gaze swept the crowd, landing momentarily on Victor. The older man stood motionless, his eyes narrowing. "But this isn't just about numbers," Leo continued, his tone hardening. "It's about the truth. Unfortunately, not everyone here tonight values transparency as much as we do." He clicked to the next slide. This one revealed damning data on Kane Industries. Gasps rippled through the audience as the screen displayed evidence of financial instability, mounting debts, overdue loans, and questionable practices. "Kane Industries," Leo said, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. "A company that has positioned itself as a pillar of stability while quietly hiding its cracks. This is the reality Victor Kane doesn't want you to see." Victor stepped forward, his carefully composed demeanor finally cracking. "This is outrageous," he barked, his voice echoing across the hall. "You have no right." "I have every right," Leo interrupted, his voice calm but unwavering. "You've spent months undermining my company, spreading lies, manipulating clients, but the truth always comes to light, Victor." The tension in the room was electric. Faces turned to Victor, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire as the audience processed the damning evidence displayed before them. Victor opened his mouth to retort, but a voice from the crowd cut him off. "Is this true, Victor?" demanded one of Kane Industries' board members, his voice trembling with anger. "Have you been hiding this from us?" Victor hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a defense. But no words came. His silence was damning. The board member shook his head in fury, stepping forward to address the crowd. "If this is accurate, then Kane Industries owes every one of us an explanation." Leo stepped back, letting the weight of the revelation settle over the room. His job wasn't just to expose Victor, it was to prove that Heartstone Realty would weather this storm and come out stronger. "Tonight is about more than uncovering the truth," Leo said, addressing the room once more. "It's about resilience. Heartstone Realty will continue to lead with integrity and transparency, and will remain a trusted partner to our clients and our community." The crowd erupted into applause, this time loud and genuine. Leo nodded once, stepping off the stage, his shoulders still tense, but his resolve unshaken. He caught Eva's eye as she stood near the edge of the room. She gave him a small nod, her expression triumphant. Victor remained in the back of the room, his face dark with anger and defeat. For the first time, Leo felt like he had the upper hand. But he knew the battle wasn't entirely over. The seeds of doubt had been sown in Victor's empire, but now Leo had to ensure his own stayed firmly rooted. As the applause died down, Leo slipped out of the hall, his phone buzzing in his pocket. A message from Ela lit up the screen. "Hope the gala's going well. Don't forget to breathe." A faint smile tugged at his lips. For the first time that night, Leo allowed himself to exhale. The fight wasn't over, but he wasn't alone anymore. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as the tide turned decisively against Victor Kane. Leo stepped down from the stage, his strides purposeful as he approached Victor, who lingered near the back of the hall. Leaning in just enough to keep their conversation private, Leo spoke, his voice firm and unyielding. "This ends tonight," he said. "Your empire of deception is crumbling, and if you don't walk away now, you'll take everyone down with you." Victor's glare was sharp, his jaw clenched so tightly that it seemed he might snap back with another cutting remark. But instead his shoulders sagged slightly, and without a word he turned and disappeared into the murmuring crowd. As Leo watched Victor retreat, he felt a flicker of triumph. It wasn't total victory, but it was a critical step forward. Eva appeared at his side, her expression a mix of relief and satisfaction. "You did it," she said softly. "For now," Leo replied, his voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "There's still a lot of damage to repair." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes, polite conversations, and assurances to the company stakeholders. By the time Leo left the gala, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little lighter. Yet as he stepped into the cool night air, his thoughts weren't on Victor or the company. Instead, they drifted to Ela. Without thinking, he drove straight to her cafe. He knew it would be closed, but he hoped she might still be there. When he arrived, the cafe was quiet, its lights dimmed. But through the window, Leo saw Ila's silhouette moving behind the counter. He knocked gently, and she looked up, surprised but smiling as she came to unlock the door. "Leo," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "What are you doing here? It's so late." "I needed to see you," he admitted, his voice soft but certain. She tilted her head, her eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "Rough night?" Leo nodded, a small a tired smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But it ended better than I expected." They sat together in the quiet of the cafe, the lingering scent of coffee and pastries adding a cozy warmth to the space. Leo told her everything, about the gala, Victor's retreat, and the weight that had finally lifted from his chest. Ila listened intently, her expression full of encouragement. When he finished, she smiled. "You're incredible, you know that?" she said. "Standing up to someone like Victor, that takes guts." "Maybe," Leo replied, his smile growing, "but I couldn't have done it without you." "Me?" Ila asked, laughing softly. "I didn't do anything." "You reminded me of what's worth fighting for," he said, his tone sincere as he held her gaze, and that made all the difference. A faint blush crept into Ila's cheeks, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched between them, not awkward, but comforting. It felt as though the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only this moment. For the first time in months, Leo felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, the crisp air of the city greeted Leo as he stood on the balcony of his penthouse. His hands rested on the cool metal railing, and he gazed out at the bustling streets below. The city moved with its usual chaotic rhythm, a reminder that life went on, no matter the battles fought above it. But for the first time in months, Leo felt calm. Not because everything was resolved, but because he had faced the truth head-on. Victor Kane was out of the picture. His schemes had been exposed, his influence diminished, and his credibility shattered. Heartstone Realty had weathered the storm, and key clients had reaffirmed their loyalty after Leo's direct intervention. Yet standing there now, Leo realized that salvaging the company wasn't the greatest victory of this chapter. It was finding clarity in his own life, understanding what truly mattered, and letting go of what didn't. His phone buzzed on the table behind him, breaking his thoughts. Walking over, he glanced at the screen and saw Margaret's name. "Morning, Margaret," he answered, his tone lighter than it had been in weeks. "Good morning," she replied, her voice carrying an unusual note of warmth. "Just wanted to give you an update. Kane Holdings officially filed for restructuring this morning. Looks like Victor's finally facing the consequences." Leo nodded, a sense of closure washing over him. "Thanks for letting me know," he said, his voice steady. Margaret's words from earlier echoed in Leo's mind as he ended the call and turned back to the city's skyline. "Priorities," she had said, and for the first time, the word felt more like a path forward than an obligation. His thoughts naturally turned to Ila, the one person who had been his calm amid the storm. She had reminded him of what truly mattered, breaking through walls he had spent years building. The familiar aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread greeted Leo as he stepped into Isla's cafe later that morning. Behind the counter, she worked with effortless grace, her hair tied back and a faint dusting of flour smudged on her cheek. She handed a customer their order and glanced up, her face lighting up with a smile that made something in Leo's chest tighten. "Leo," she said, walking over as the last customer exited, "you're up early." "I could say the same about you," he replied, leaning casually against the counter. "Don't you ever take a break?" She laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not when there's work to do. Besides, this is what I love." Without a word, Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the counter. Isla raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up cautiously. "Open it," he said softly. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore open the envelope, pulling out a single piece of paper. Her eyes widened as she read, her hand flying to her mouth. "Leo, is this?" "It's a lease agreement," he said, his voice steady. "For that space downtown you told me about, the one you've always dreamed of for your bakery." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him, her voice trembling. "I can't accept this, Leo. It's too much." "It's not," he replied, reaching across the counter to take her hand. His touch was gentle, but his gaze was unwavering. "You've given so much to everyone around you, Isla. Let me give this to you." Her head shook, overwhelmed by emotion. "Why would you do this?" Leo's voice softened, but his words carried a weight he hadn't allowed himself to express before. "Because you deserve it, Isla. And because I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time." The world seemed to hold its breath as Isla looked at him, tears spilling over despite the soft laugh that escaped her lips. Then, without hesitation, she stepped around the counter and threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Leo held her just as tightly, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. In that moment, he knew this was the right choice, not just the lease, but the leap of opening his heart to her. For the first time, it felt like he was truly home. Weeks passed, and the grand opening of Isla's bakery was a celebration unlike any other. The small downtown space had been transformed into a cozy haven, its warm lighting and charming decor inviting everyone who passed by. The smell of fresh pastries mingled with the sound of laughter as friends, neighbors, and even some of Leo's colleagues filled the shop. Maggie flitted through the crowd, her energy fully restored, her radiant smile shining as she handed out cookies. Isla moved effortlessly from table to table, her cheeks flushed with joy as she greeted customers, each interaction filled with her trademark warmth. Leo stood by the counter, watching her in awe. She had created something magical, a place that didn't just serve food, but brought people together. When she finally joined him, her smile was wide, her excitement glowing. "You've created something amazing here," Leo said, his voice full of admiration. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her smile softening. "You would have found a way," Leo said confidently. "You always do." Her eyes met his, gratitude shining in their depths. But there was something else there too, something deeper that neither of them could deny. For a moment, the bustle around them faded, leaving only the two of them. "Thank you," Isla said, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as he took a deep breath. "Isla, I want to ask you something." Her smile faltered slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Leo took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Time seemed to stand still, the soft hum of the bakery fading into silence as he turned to face Isla. She tilted her head, her smile faltering slightly as curiosity flickered in her eyes. But when he dropped to one knee, her hands flew to her mouth, her breath catching. "Isla Brooks," Leo began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions threatening to break through. "You've shown me what it means to truly live, to love without expectation, to find joy in the simplest moments, and to be the best version of myself. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." He held the box out, revealing a delicate ring that sparkled even in the bakery's warm light. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. Tears spilled down Ila's cheeks as she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes," she whispered, her tone growing stronger with each word. 1,000 times, yes. The room erupted into cheers and applause as Leo slipped the ring onto her finger. He rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that spoke all the words he couldn't say. For the first time in his life, Leo felt whole, complete, in a way he hadn't known was possible. The celebration around them grew, friends and family surrounding them with congratulations and laughter. Maggie darted through the crowd, beaming as she proudly showed off a tray of cupcakes adorned with delicate frosting flowers, as if she'd known this moment was coming all along. "You've got a flair for drama, don't you?" Ila teased, her voice soft and full of love as she leaned into Leo's chest. "I learned from the best," he replied, his smile matching the joy in her eyes. The bakery buzzed with life and warmth, and yet for Leo the world had narrowed to the woman in his arms. He'd spent years chasing success, building walls, and searching for something he couldn't name. But here in this small bakery, with flour-dusted counters and the scent of vanilla in the air, he had found everything he'd been looking for. As the evening wore on, Leo and Isla stood together by the bakery window, watching the city lights flicker to life. His hand remained firmly in hers, their fingers intertwined as if nothing could pull them apart. "This is just the beginning," Leo said softly, turning to look at her. "It is," Isla agreed, her smile bright. "And I can't wait to see where it takes us." With Isla by his side, Leo knew they would face whatever came their way. They had built something real, something that no storm could ever shake. And as they stood there, surrounded by the love of those who mattered most, Leo felt something he hadn't felt in years. He was home.